I think Mark Zuckerberg is appeased.
Live streaming on Facebook.
Awesome. So are we about ready then?
Let's see. It says done, but let's. Yeah, I believe. Let me click one more time. It says live stream is on.
Oh yeah, I see it.
Great. Okay. Well, I think with that, yeah, we can get started. That would be great.
All right, so we're ready to go. For those of you who just arrived, you should see a poll appearing on your screen. It's just 3 questions about green parrots. We don't expect people to know the answers, but we would like to see your best guess, and we will be giving you our answers later in the presentation. So just check out that poll. And let's begin. We are so excited to have you here with us for the launch of the New to Nature campaign. Welcome. Thank you for attending. Today, you will have 3 presenters, myself, Lauren Alley, and Mark Gibson, and Neve Vaughn. So I'm going to be telling you about who we are as a campaign. Mark will tell you all about the harmful wildlife trade, and Neve will tell you what we're doing about it. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the campaign. Our goal as New to Nature is to end the harmful pet wildlife trade in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are dedicated to this cause because the trade actually touches a really broad range of species and they're all experiencing harm at every stage of it. You're going to learn a lot about that today. We are very lucky to be working with a coalition of 13 regional and local NGOs. And they all have a history of doing really excellent work that demonstrates that they both care about wildlife in Trinidad and Tobago and that they're really competent in enabling animal welfare and wildlife conservation. And we have a broad group of NGOs here. So we've got animal welfare organizations like the Animal Welfare Network, TTSPCA, Animals Alive, Animals 360, and Venus Daughters of Love. And these guys do a lot of rescue work, mostly with domestic pets like dogs and cats, but also other things like horses and the occasional non-domestic like parrots. And they also provide low-income communities with low-cost spay and neuter programs, empowering them to make better animal welfare decisions. And they offer invaluable regulatory advocacy to improve animal welfare. We also have 2 veterinary organizations, the Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association and the Veterinary Students Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And vets are vital because they're not only treating wildlife that is affected by the trade, but they're also offering professional development to improve and increase the veterinary capacity of our nation. We also have wildlife rehabilitators and propagators like the El Socorro Wildlife Center and Corbin Local Wildlife Park. And they provide really excellent public education about wildlife and biodiversity in Trinidad and Tobago through wildlife tours, but also through their own rescue and rehab work and offering rescue and rehab certifications. And then finally, we have some really excellent research and conservation NGOs, such as Sustainable Innovation Initiatives, CREST, Environment Tobago, and the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club. And they're engaged in education, partnership building, and scientific work. We think it's really wonderful that such a broad range of organizations has come together to tackle the harmful wildlife trade. And we are lucky to have them working with our campaign team. Now, you'll notice that our campaign team are our presenters today, and each of us is actually affiliated with one of our coalition member NGOs. So I, Lauren Alley, am a campaign manager for New to Nature, but I'm also a longtime operational assistant at Animals Alive, which is actually the Caribbean's largest no-kill animal shelter. And I have an MPhil in zoology, which I got from my recent study of shark exploitation in Trinidad and Tobago. Our campaign director, Mark Gibson, is affiliated with Sustainable Innovation Initiatives, or SII, and he's getting his PhD in green criminology at Michigan State University. He's also done work in the past with Pew Charitable Trusts, protecting global deep sea habitats, and reforming the Ecuadorian fishery with the World Wildlife Fund. Our other campaign manager, Neve Vaughn, is a coordinator at Corbin Local Wildlife Park, and she's done extensive volunteer work with save our sea turtles in Tobago. And right now she's pursuing her MSc in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development from the University of the West Indies. And we are supported by 4 wonderful advisors: Ryan Mohammed, who is a highly published aquatic ecologist; Nigel Noriega, a wild animal physiologist and founder of SII; and the conservationist Bernadette Player, who's actually the founder of CREST, which is best known for reintroducing the blue and gold macaw when it was locally extirpated. And finally, Dr. Diego Verissimo, who is a behavior change specialist with 15 years of marketing experience. Our work is made possible by our wonderful donors, US Fish and Wildlife and USAID, who together run the Caribbean Program for Biodiversity Conservation. And they're all about local capacity building to reduce threats to biodiversity through their technical and financial supports. Finally, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our history. So the Nature Nature campaign has roots in a joint project between the Conservation Leadership in the Caribbean Program, which is otherwise known as CLIC, and the Windward Islands Research and Education Foundation, or WINDREF, at Michigan State University. So these organizations work together to conduct research with parrot owners and pet shops, as well as parrot care, workshops, and community outreach. And this experience led to a connection with a diverse group of NGOs, which led to the formalization of our current coalition under an under an MOU, which was followed up by a social marketing workshop with the Oxford Martin program. And since then, Nature Nature has been very busy conducting research on the harmful wildlife trade, including household surveys, pet owner interviews, photo documentation, and more, which Mark Gibson is going to tell us all about right now. Take it away, Mark.
Great, thank you, Lauren. All right, let me set myself up here with a screen share. That's great. Thank you very much for that introduction. All right, I'm being asked options on Zoom before it lets me proceed. Great. Okay. All right. Trinidad and Tobago pet wildlife trade. This is what has brought us all together. It's a lot to describe in one presentation. So I will preface this to say we have a lot of material on our website and there's a lot more forthcoming. So the goal today was actually to, one, show you the sort of granularity that we can hit with the research that we've done, with that poll that we've given you, but also then bring it back to the basics, help you understand in a few key terms what's going on when we talk about the Trinidad and Tobago pet wildlife trade. All right, so let's introduce some granularity, guys. We have all done our poll. So before let's see, let me pull up the poll results and we will compare our answers. So ending poll, let me see if I can share this, share results. So let's see how you guys did when we talk about the local green parrot, otherwise known as the orange-wing Amazon. So this is a key species in the Trinidad and Tobago pet wildlife trade that people may not really think much about. It is culturally a commonplace wild animal in the home. But what we found in our research is that there's a lot of issues going on with this. And so we thought this was great, a sort of emblematic animal to start thinking about. So in our first question, we asked how many local green parrots or orange-wing Amazons are kept in captivity in Trinidad and Tobago. The overwhelming guess was 10,000 to 30,000, with 34% of you guys responding. Actually, it's a lot more. Actually, according to a national household survey of 2004 households, randomly selected with the assistance of the Central Statistical Office, we can say with 95% confidence based on this data that there's between 30 and 50,000 green parrots alone kept in captivity, the vast majority of them in Trinidad. What I can also tell you is that we know that these are conservative estimates. when we went out and piloted this survey in so many different locations, I actually encountered numerous families that, they don't trust some stranger coming knocking on their door in some communities, and so they won't tell you every animal they have, even something as commonplace as a green parrot. And in fact, I even had an interview where at the very end, of course, a family member walked in and said, "Oh, did you tell them about the parrot?" And there was another person, another animal to add to the survey, or at least showed that we wouldn't get it all. So yeah, up to 50,000 parrots. How many do you think ever go to the vet? So the overwhelming estimate was under 10%. So you all really nailed that one. I think there must be a lot of Trinis on the call. And it is a sad state. So this is of reported green parrots, right? We didn't extrapolate for statistical. This is actually reported by these households. 8.3%, under 10% ever go to a veterinarian once in their life. This is pretty wild, actually, because we have some other data from the survey that show many of these birds don't really live past 10 to 15 years of age. But in captivity, as best as veterinarian experts can say, these birds have the capacity to live 70 years or more in captivity with good care. There's a lot of research out there that says vitamin A deficiency is a major killer. So too many sunflower seeds and not correct diet. So a lot of birds are in captivity and a lot are not being well cared for. The last question we asked was, do you need a permit to have a green parrot? Yes, most of you think that yes, you need a permit to have it year round. Crazy enough, actually, green parrot is still on the Schedule 2, which means that it's considered a game species, which if the state decides to issue a permit, you can hunt it. It's on that list along with things like quenk and green iguana. However, because it's there, you do technically need a permit during close season. There are no permitting measures right now to get such a permit. So approximately 50,000 parrots or more are illegal for a certain number of months a year, and then they're not legal, or then they're illegal, and then they're illegal again and again. So this starts to tell you a picture of there's a lot of wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife not being well cared for, and there's not a very strong regulatory control. Okay, so these are some intro questions. We've got tons more data, but I thought this would be a great way to kind of just paint how complex and challenging this is. But let's take a step back now, all right? If you were really to think about the entire Trinidad and Tobago pet wildlife trade, what should you think about? Well, first, you're going to want to do a lot of research or check out what we've come up with. We're going to have a lot more material coming up in future months. So as I mentioned, we did a national household survey with Central Statistical Office. We also did a survey of social media, online sales, how people interact online, how they make offers known, buys known, even if they put prices, how many people are fearless and just put their name. All this data is anonymized on our end, but it goes to show that this is kind of a free-for-all online. Then finally, we have expert interviews as a real key piece of what we've done. We have interviewed a lot of people. Neve Vaughn has worked with me along with a number of other people for the last 3 years to interview everyone ranging from pet shop operators and veterinarians who might know a lot about the wildlife trade, even up to talking to current and former wildlife traffickers. So we've learned a lot. And let's see what are some key takeaways that we're going to have. I like to put this in 4 terms, and you'll see this a little bit paralleled on the website, pretty close. First term to really consider, guys, is we have a huge diversity in this trade from the research that we've done. At present count, and we're being so conservative because we want to put numbers out there that are robust and can withstand scientific rigor. So right now, we are comfortable saying that there are at least 79 species in trade. I think the website says like 78 or 75, but that's the latest count where we've triangulated across multiple data sets. We've either taken photos of these in captivity. We've got wildlife rehabilitators with just record after record of these animals in their care, or we've got people admitting to it again and again and again. That's just 75 species. And on top of that, in this whole diversity, we're not even talking about all range of animals. In fact, for our study, we only looked at birds, mammals, and reptiles. Amphibians, freshwater fish are still a wide open territory to assess. So let me talk a little bit about some of the numbers here. So we've got at least 20 parrot species. This is things like in the top left corner, your green-winged macaw, things like your yellow-shouldered parrot, your yellow-crowned parrot, and your local green, and your blue and gold. You also have at least 21 non-parrot birds, basically. You can find probably a more elegant way to say that, but it's songbirds and other animals. So picoplat, toucan, we've got bullfinch on here, okay? Out of mammals, let's look at one that is so ethically complicated, primates. We've got at least 7 primates. And squirrel monkey, we've got numerous species of capuchins, spider monkey. We also have at least 17 non-primate mammals that are traded with some frequency enough to really be concerned about. Jaguars increasingly in the news, ocelots. One just was killed on a roadside recently in an area that some seem to think it might have been dumped or escaped locally. Got quank, giant otter, neotropical otter, sloths, and on and on. And then finally, for reptiles, we've got things like the largest snake in the world, the green anaconda. I've seen numerous ones of those, and I believe there was a recent seizure as well by Forestry Division of a green anaconda. So this is a huge number, and this number is only going to grow. I can tell you already that in this count, I'm not including the national bird of Venezuela, which I would include with more caveats. Basically, a wildlife trafficker offered it to me as a gift, which is a strange experience when you're a wildlife criminologist. So there are more species, but it's how we quantify it. So this is a very conservative number, 75, 78 or more. All right, beyond diversity, Trinidad and Tobago pet trade, we also have lots of harms, okay? We have ample material of this on our website, so we encourage people to check this out. We break our harms down into 4 categories: harms to people, harms to ecosystems, harms to animals, and harms to society. Harms to people, that's a graphic image, but it's very real. It's one shared to us by El Socorro Wildlife Conservation Center, or Center for Wildlife Conservation. Sorry about that, Ricardo. Bites happen a lot. Also happens with birds, right? But beyond the harms for people for these sorts of physical injuries, we have documented cases of transmission of people who have tattoo, or otherwise known as armadillo, and leprosy cases. We have cases of tuberculosis transmission from capuchins to people. Yellow fever, more years distant, but a number of public health inspectors said that yes, this has happened. There are some real harms. Then we have harms to ecosystems. So this image is a little small, but it's from a recent paper by Muhammad et al., who looked at populations of red-eared sliders in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a non-native species. It's considered one of the most invasive in the world, and it's spreading. It's all over Trinidad in its waterways. You don't see them yet in Tobago, but that is a very chilling thought. This is, again, considered one of the 100 most invasive species, and it is aggressive to native species, as best as naturalists can tell. More research could be done, but there's still a lot of concerns. We also have local genetic diversity, and I won't go too deep into that, but I do encourage you to look at our website. Beyond this, we have harms to animals. This sad image actually is the least sad of the ones that I had collected. We have some wonderful vets who've just shared with us so many pictures. But this is a bird that is engaged in feather plucking. Parrots have the intelligence, especially macaws, have the intelligence of a toddler, and they live decades, often in a cage with no stimulation, often not even able to fly around. Boredom hits, they get a lot of self-harm behaviors. It's terrible. Then we also have some massive harms to society, right? This headline always, it's almost a little dark humor. But imagine when you're catching a smuggler and he's transporting both hand grenades and capuchin monkeys, right? This just goes to show it very vividly for me that the wildlife trade intersects with the gun trade. And we also know it intersects with the drug trade and also the trade in people. So we have lots of harms to lots of biodiversity. Next thing I want you guys to think in is in terms of stages. So we have some international trade stages and we have some local. In fact, a lot of the species come from the Orinoco. They come from Venezuela. This is in Trinidad pretty much common knowledge, but you do have some species sourced locally. But in fact, many of them aren't even found locally anymore, like the bullfinch. If you get a bullfinch that's considered local, you can command a premium up to 10,000 Trinidadian dollars for a single bird, whereas a brown bird, a juvenile bird from Venezuela, might be 400 to 600 TT. So stages. We're looking at Venezuela and we're looking at some from Trinidad and some within Tobago. We break these stages down into 4 subcategories, okay? But what I'm going to explain is that the harms are rather asymmetric. So the harms that I just spoke about, let's think about this. In collection stage, you have a huge impact on biodiversity and animal welfare. The nest poaching of parrots destroys, we know from scientific research, destroys nesting habitat. It also results in high mortality of the chicks. We know from stories again and again from wildlife traffickers themselves, you use lethal force for all these infant primates that are in Trinidad now. On top of that, misnetting in jungles is just like, it's indiscriminate. You can take so many birds, and they often do. It's stripping the forest of many, many birds. And in fact, that's what's happened in Trinidad with other more selective methods. But in Venezuela, we do know that they use a lot of misnets. Beyond collection, we have transportation. Okay, so when we think about this, first you can consider that pirogues can reach Venezuela in under 60 minutes and a lot less with a stronger motor. You have a lot of inlets where boats can hide on both sides in South Trinidad and in Venezuela. And then you think about the harms. So not only is it illegal in many respects, this is smuggling, but when Coast Guard would interdict and find people, find traffickers coming in, they'll, quote, destroy the evidence. And that means drowning the animals, sending them overboard. Many stories I've heard is that the supposed smarter traffickers will have bricks in the bottom of the cages. So that way, when the Coast Guard comes, they'll sink real quick and they can't be recovered. Like you would see here in this article where, yes, they did recover 47 drowned birds and were able to charge people. All right, so we have a whole lot of illegality. We have a whole lot of animal welfare issue in this stage. In sales, in the next stage, we know that sales occur on Facebook, openly on public groups, and certainly in private groups and in direct messaging. This is not allowed even for Facebook policy. In fact, you can't sell a living animal on Facebook officially, but it's open season. WhatsApp is also used really regularly, and it depicts that in this sales stage, wholesalers have a lot of bird mortality. This is a still from a recent image I got, and the retired trafficker who sent this to me had very sort of dark humor, and it was a Tuesday, and he said, half of those are going to be dead by Friday. That's why I quit, right? Huge amounts of mortality. Then lastly, we have a lot of really pushing the limit about what's legal. A lot of pet shops advertise. Sorry, it's a little hard to see. It is on our website. But in the top right corner of this image, you actually see advertising with a red howler, which is a real big no-no from local management perspective. You see a red howler hanging from the tree with macaws and a number of other prohibited species, all saying, come to our pet shop. And many people tell us again and again, they get their animals through pet shops, just they're not kept at the storefront. So we know a lot of issues with illegality, animal harm, and then finally, we get to the last stage, captivity. This is real sad for many, many animals. In some respects, it is illegal. Many people don't have the required permits. It's tremendously complicated, in fact. If you think up to 50,000 green parrots that sort of need a permit half the year, The current permitting standards is to issue those only for 12 months at a time. So there's a huge administrative backlog on permits. But then flip side, you have the animals facing a lot of stress. Monkeys, extreme boredom, decades of captivity. Many of them don't entirely have all their sanity by the end of it. They can live up to 25, 30 years. You see tons of macaws in different locations that are just sickly looking, and many never go see a vet. And then you see a lot of wild animals becoming attractions, even performers in some locations. And again, the conditions are not great. This is an ocelot. It's a cryptic species. It's meant to travel huge amounts of area. And this is for profit enterprise here, showing this. So there's a lot of harms across the stages and a lot of diversity that's being put through this trade. So these are three key points that we've learned along with our research, but we've also learned a lot through dialogue and research on what has been done elsewhere to also be able to talk a little more optimistically about solutions. Okay, so this is the final point that I want to really leave with you guys. First, this is stuff that we aren't directly doing, even though our logo is there. And what we would say is that we work on behavior change, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this is where we would like to grow. And we know many interesting people on the call might feel the same. So we put this out here both to inspire and say we would love to talk more about this. First, broad solution area, which is again detailed on the website. One, empowering local law enforcement. So there are 19 current game wardens for all of Trinidad and Tobago. And they are charged with regulating all hunting, all wild meat sales, and all captive wildlife permits. I mean, you got to have some off days. There's many days and places where these things just will not get regulated. You don't have enough staff. They used to have an honorary game warden program, and that was cut several years ago. So these guys feel very underhanded, and they're doing a tremendous job. Another area is regional cooperation for behavior change and more. So we like to see ourselves as a great example for regional cooperation with our donors, some of our regional NGOs, and our local NGOs. And we would love to see if we could help other countries do this. A lot of animals get imported from Guyana into Trinidad, for instance, so there might be room for cooperation there. And more broadly, it's on the website, but I'll point out the Caribbean is real latecomer in setting up something called a wildlife enforcement network. They exist in most of the regions of the world, but not here. And this is where countries can information share, train together, and really find new ideas to tackle these tough trades. Another area to grow, of course, as I've alluded to, reform of laws and management approaches. So not only is permitting really complicated and you could argue not very effective right now, but even the Conservation of Wildlife Act, it originally was passed before independence. And since that time, it's had a lot of amendments. I would say as a criminologist, it is really difficult to know what the current law is, just because there's so many amendments to piece through and it's all written in legalese. We don't even have an up-to-date summary of the current law. Last time that was issued was 2016, and we've had at least 6 amendments since then. So there's lots of rooms to grow, but then I'm gonna switch back then to our campaign and what we're doing, and that is behavior change. So this is something Diogo Verissimo is wonderful about help guiding us on. What do we mean by behavior change? Well, we are picking some messages or some goals, and we're trying to disseminate it across broad audiences. We're trying to set expectations for ethical behavior, remove legal confusion, and help people understand that they don't have to participate in this harmful trade, but they still can have a fantastic time with their pets. There are ultimately a lot of parrots that need rescuing. If some system was ever set up for them, that would be fantastic. So there's a lot we can do, but we're going to be beginning with the messaging. So that's what Neve will talk to you next about. So I'm going to turn this over to Neve Vaughn.
Hi, everyone. Let me just set my screen sharing up. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you all about what the campaign is doing and specifically our behavior change objectives. The key goal is to influence individuals' behaviors by communicating new information to them, which then leads to new decisions being made around that information. And then that new decision making leads to new behaviors. So the key messages I'm going to bring to you now, these were refined during our coalition workshop last year, which was mentioned previously. So the first message is stop buying wild. Eventually, we want people to see these wild animals and think, no, I'm not going to be buying them because I know they're part of this harmful trade. So this is, the first goal, obviously. Then we want people to rescue and adopt animals. There are so many animals that need loving homes, and we want people to think of a rescue cat or dog as a really exceptional pet. Like you would prefer to get a rescue cat or dog, or perhaps a parrot should we get those guidelines soon. And this is because we want them to think rescues as being better than, say, a capuchin monkey, which over time, they're costly, it's expensive to keep, and they may also end up being aggressive over time. Or say a green parrot or a macaw who live decades. So we really want to get people to rescue and adopt. Then we want the people that do have these wild animals as pets to go to the vet. This means that while they're treating these animals, the vets are able to be really powerful advocates, teaching these pet owners about the trade and how harmful it can be and how best to give their pets care. So we'll be communicating these messages across diverse channels and targeting diverse audiences. And one of the first ways we hope to do that is with our tours. We'll be doing subsidized tours with our campaign, our coalition members, El Socorro Center for Wildlife Conservation and Corbin Local Wildlife Park. So these are both our rehabilitation centers, and they already offer amazing tours. We will just be working with them to create subsidized tours that are targeted a little bit more towards education on the wildlife trade. They already do a little bit of this, but these tours will just a little extra information on the trade. Then we will be doing vets, we'll be supporting vets, and we will be developing posters for pet clinics that can educate their clients while they're waiting in the, the clinic waiting room to be seen. They'll have posters sending them information. Then there'll be rescue parrot guidelines, and we'll be hoping to do that with our vets. And this is so that people who keep parrots get to learn how to properly care for them. And we'll be hosting workshops to educate more and more vets on the harms of the trade and our cause and how they can better advocate for wildlife pets. And yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Then we'll be doing webinars. We'll also be highlighting more niche topics this way to help the community collaborate and learn together. The campaign will host at least 10 webinars this year on topics such as how to report trade crimes to Crime Stoppers, or on common nutritional and behavioral issues found in captive parrots, topics like this. We'll also be creating and channeling resources by directing people to help by donating to our coalition members, how they can access education about the trade and other related topics, and how they can experience wildlife in the wilds by exploring responsibly our nation, which hosts some amazing biodiversity. And then lastly, how people can get actively involved themselves. If they like what they're hearing and seeing, there's so many amazing organizations that can always benefit from the support of another volunteer. Also, we are doing social marketing on social media. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then of course we have a lot of content on our website. This is just an example of one of the posts we made recently. So this is an educational post. This is teaching people that Should their cat or dog have gone missing during the old year's firework displays that always happen? You know, these are the NGOs and community groups to maybe check out if they have lost their pet. So that's just an example of some of our social marketing. And finally, we are working on more things to come. So we'll be promoting new activities in the weeks and months ahead, and we always welcome new collaborations. So be sure to contact us if you're interested in collaborating. And with that, I'm going to open the floor to the Q&A. So we'll all be, myself, Mark, and Lauren will be answering your questions now if you have any. Hope you have
Great.
some.
Thank you, Neve. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so there is a hopefully short but sweet overview of the Nurture Nature campaign. And I'll just say again, direct yourselves to the website if you want to know more. We've got a lot of great content there. And with that, would we have any questions? We are going to be entering into a Q&A. You can raise your hand and or type in a question, and we're here to answer. Or let's see. Okay.
Oh, Q&A.
Here we go. This might be a hard question, but do wildlife and domestic animals often live together in the same home? That is actually a great question, Natasha. We're crunching the numbers on this, but this is something that we found. In general, it does seem that when you're an animal lover and you keep wildlife, at least certain species, maybe not the extreme exotics like jaguars and other animals, but in general, you have a lot of overlap with dog ownership and wild animal keeping. And that was one reason why we, in fact, partnered so strongly with veterinarians. We know it's been done in some places, but this is new to me. In fact, partnering with veterinarians for wildlife conservation. But they interact with a lot of people with these parrots. Even though they don't bring the parrots in, they may bring their dog in, and they're actually much more likely to. So that's a big part of our theory of change, in fact. Thanks, Natasha. Neve, do you guys want to pick one here?
Sure. So we have a question on, please say some more about the coalition approach and how this plays out for Nurture Nature. Well, I think it's fantastic that we're able to have 13 different NGOs in our coalition. I think it's somewhat unique. We don't often have such a wide, diverse group of NGOs with so many overlapping but differing objectives, of course, work together so well. And so we would like to think we have really great communications with all our NGO reps. And yeah, I think it's fantastic that we're able to work together to, you know, highlight such a problematic issue.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of potential through our NGOs to really accomplish things, because they already have networks, they already have boots on the ground, they're already tackling a lot of these issues separately in different ways. And hopefully we can keep pulling that together to create a really cohesive approach to this problem. And we've got another question. What is your understanding of the level of knowledge of wildlife owners about the legal issues and the need to take them to veterinarians? Well, actually, we have a decent understanding of this, but that is to be published later in the results of our national household survey. But there is kind of a mixed bag. Some wildlife owners are aware of the legal issues. They don't take their pets out in public, some of them, because they are concerned about potentially facing some legal ramifications for unpermitted pets. However, others are mainly unaware. They've just grown up with these animals. They've had them for their whole lives. Their parents had them, their grandparents had them, and it was never a problem. So there's two diverging groups there. And
Yeah, I would add, Lauren, there's kind of there are the pets that everyone really take for granted, like green parrots and Morocco, but most of the animals people know what they're doing requires a permit. However, usually they're not too concerned about the legal issues unless they're upsetting a neighbor with noise or maybe a risky animal to have next door. Um, Many people say that they don't want to take it to the vet because they're afraid that the vet will report them. And in my veterinary interviews, some did say that they'll turn down people who don't have permits, but I didn't find anyone who would ever say that they would turn someone in. And so that's one, sub message I think for go get your pet checked, which is also what we hope for future resources, identifying vets with suitable experience, because we know that you guys at Mount Hope have a pretty really interesting training program for people to work with what these would be called exotics, and can give that sort of care. So there are vets. Many don't know of vets to contact, and in fact, just in the last year, I've sent referrals for different veterinarians who work with birds and other animals. I mean, at least a dozen times, just to people who participated in interviews. So that's my additional 10 cents. So there's one. Let's see. Neve, you want to take another?
Sure. Hi, Amy. I'll answer your question. I'll take a stab at it. So what do you think it is that makes wildlife owners desire to have a wildlife species as a pet? I suspect that it would be hard to convince those persons who own a macaw, for example, to switch to a dog, as their motivations may be different. Yes, of course. Lauren could probably talk a little bit on this in terms of motivations, as she's been crunching that data a lot recently. But yes, of course, there's such a wide range of motivations across pet owners. But what we have found is most people that do keep these pets obviously have strong emotional connections to them. Yes, there are some people that like having an animal because of its sheer beauty, or perhaps it's a bit of a status symbol. But at the basis of it all is there is an emotional connection towards these animals. But there's also perhaps space for us to educate them on maybe not this current animal they have, but the next purchase they make or the next animal they acquire. This is where we want this behavior change to happen. We can't change people really that already have these pets. But the next time they get a pet, let's make them think of getting a cat or dog instead. So macaws are quite costly to keep, as well as most wildlife. If you were to keep them properly and keep them in good health and care, they're expensive. So there's always that angle to take, but we have such a wide range of targeted messages for different motivations. So Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the other motivations from the data you've crunched.
Well, people who own parrots, a lot of them seem to be bird people. Like bird people love birds. However, there are a variety of domesticated species that can be acquired without having to misnet them from the wild and steal them from their nests and things. There are many, many birds that bird lovers can enjoy. And of course, for people who have parrots already, we are hoping to be working very closely with vets to improve parrot rescue guidelines. So some of these really dedicated bird owners could in the future perhaps even become qualified parrot rescuers. That would be ideal.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Natasha Nunez, you ask, what are the legal consequences to owning wildlife, and are there any precedent on convictions? So there are fines. They've been increasing in recent years, and I can even tell you the most recent one as I bring up my files here. But in general, you don't see many people getting charged, even with a fine. You tend not to see anyone being charged because it's something that tends to be more reserved for people who are trafficking. So that's a way to charge someone who has a very large number in their possession. Um, so let's see. The latest update, because the fines have recently been updated. Protected animals. No person, this is section 9 of the Conservation of Wildlife Act. No person shall keep a protected animal in captivity with the exception of animals listed in the third schedule. So anything that would be considered vermin. And anyone who contravenes that regulation is liable to a conviction of 5,000 Trinidad and Tobago dollars. And then there's also a whole set of other fines. In fact, for selling, similar, I think that's 5,000, and that's standard for wildlife. There are some species that are really, really no-no, and they have a additional special protection, and they're called an ESS species, environmentally sensitive species. So those species right now tend to more often be animals that are hunted. But so a scarlet ibis, for instance, the national bird, there have been some hunting cases of actually going after these, and that's a big fine. I believe 100,000 Trinidad and Tobago dollars now for violating that. Convictions is really complicated. The cases in the past have tended to drag on years, and at times there have been some real wild requirements. And that have required reforms in the courts. And I don't think we're quite there yet. But some of the past reforms were at one point you had to present the live animal. And I believe there was a time even a live sea turtle had to be kept nearby to present as an exhibit. And we've got news articles to that. So it's really hard right now to get convictions unless we were to really, I think, find some greater leadership within the courts. Thank you, Natasha.
We've had a few questions asking about who people can report instances of someone's asking if they see someone with them a corner, very small cage, or if they see poachers. Mark, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, this is a really complicated one. I think you can also set this in the broader context also of animal welfare in this country, which in recent years there have been some really higher profile issues of dogs being tremendously abused, just things that you really wouldn't want to say in polite company. And it really challenging the courts because animal abuse laws are well, quite outdated and vague and aren't often applied. You know, this is a country with a very high crime rate of things that people think are more serious, which in many cases I would say they might be right. But you know, drugs, guns, gangs. So it is really hard. This is one thing we're hoping to change. I will add that we have recently been in touch with some very friendly folks with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and we're hoping that we can let this be part of the change where we have some system for reporting and some system for accountability going forward. And we can talk more about some of those ideas in the future, but I'll stay out of the weeds. All right. Anyone else? Lauren, Neve, you guys want to grab one?
Linton has a question. Are there any guidelines available to pet owners who are interested in releasing their pets back into the wild? For example, gallops, the local turtle, or indigenous species. So animals or pets that are, I guess, from here, as well as the ones that pose exotic risks. Right now, there are no current guidelines available. What we would suggest is that if you do say own a red air slider that is outgrown its space, you may no longer want to look after it. They pose an exotic risk, as do some of the bird species as well. Not as much, but the red air sliders are definitely the highest exotic risk right now. you would want to contact one of the rehabilitation centers that we have spoken to. They do both actually have red air sliders on at their centers, at their sites, because they don't want them getting into the nation's waterways. But no, there are no hard and fast guidelines. Mostly we would point people to the rehabilitation centers. Similarly, for if they wanted to give up their animals, they no longer wanted them, we would guide them to those rehab centers. But guidelines would be a good thing to work on, so more to come on that.
That's great. All right. Yeah, so we would generally, I would say, contact rehabilitation centers or the zoo as places that are receptive to wildlife. Linton, I'll add that a very sad fact of this trade is that animals in the trade cannot usually be released right back into the wild. Reptiles would be the exception, but again, some are invasive, so you have to be very careful. But these are more instinctual animals. Other animals like I said, macaws with the intelligence of a toddler, or a capuchin, it's a primate. I mean, they're very smart animals. They have a whole set of learning that they missed out on. And in fact, many don't know how to forage for food, how to make friends in the wild. So you see a lot of capuchins loose in chaguaramas, for instance. All those capuchins are non-native. And, people may see that and think, oh, well, then I'll just put my monkey out there. But in fact, those capuchins are likely, there's no great research, but the general opinion is that many animals will not be able to survive. So those are the real successful ones that have made it that far.
And being competitive for resources for our local native species, of course.
Yeah, they're very yeah, that's great. That's really great. Lauren, do you want to take one?
Yeah, sure. All right. So great presentation. Will you consider, or are there plans in the future for proposal to train/sensitize law enforcement officers, not game wardens, in wildlife trafficking, bearing in mind the links to organized crime? Yes, absolutely. We would love to participate and facilitate something like that. We are already in communication with a few people, and there will definitely be more on that to come.
Yeah, that's exactly. Thank you, Jenny. We will be talking to you soon. Neve, anything you want to take?
We have one question. You've barely started, but what is your sustainability strategy with regards to funding and membership? Well, I can talk to funding just a little bit. Mark is probably better suited to talk about this, but in terms of funding, we are, as a team, as a coalition, geared towards and looking forward to grant writing, developing grants, and best finding out how we can keep this work up as well as expand it. We have such a wide group of coalition members that we would love to be able to support them in other endeavors they have that line up with the Nurture Nature campaign and our goals. So yes, we definitely have our mind, or we've got our gaze set on doing more grant development. In terms of membership, Mark, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, that it is a tremendous question, and coalition management. So I've been very fortunate to have managed larger coalitions or co-managed, let's say, at WWF, at Pew Charitable Trusts, on issues that are just so big that and a single NGO alone cannot work together. So in that respect, sustainability, I guess, for keeping our coalition members happy, we're here to talk to them and brainstorm and figure out ways to boost their exposure, find collaboration on these shared goals, and that's the basics of it. And then we do welcome new members. We do keep in mind that we all are doing this. I think I think we're doing a decent job, and we have a very much a nonprofit budget. So at some point, we are at an outer limit for how many NGOs we can manage in the coalition. But right now, 13 as it stands, there's definitely room to grow. But we just are kind of taking it one step at a time. So if you're interested, please reach out. We welcome all sorts of messages on the website and social media, and we're very happy to talk more. Thank you. Anonymous attendee, I think, is that the last question there?
It seems so.
And what have game wardens indicated? Okay, great. So yeah, these are interesting ones. State agencies endorsed, supported this campaign. So the original research project that got the data was supported by a number of government agencies. We needed those endorsements to do it, following all best practices for ethics, as especially overseen by my university, Michigan State. We ultimately decided to keep this an NGO coalition. That's partly to do with my background. I don't have much experience in trying to build projects that mix nonprofit organizations and state agencies. And we are very friendly, however, with staff at Environmental Management Authority, staff at Forestry Division in Trinidad, and staff at DNRF in Tobago, the counterpart to Trinidad Forestry Division, as well as a whole range of other folks in Tobago. We are very supportive, and we hope to do more work with them. But as far as formal membership, we've kept this to NGOs. But I know many great people with the government, and we don't approach this in a critical way. We really want to build bridges and find ways to collaborate. And since I'm the criminologist, let's do the last question here. Another anonymous attendee. What have game wardens indicated is needed to improve their monitoring and enforcement? So what was really fascinating was one person that was very supportive in our project was a member of the Conservation Leadership in the Caribbean program. And so some early research was actually doing interviews with law enforcement officers from Customs, Coast Guard, and Forestry Division, ultimately just shy of 50 of them. And it was a semi-structured survey asking, what do you think are the problems around wildlife trade? We anchored it around the blue and gold macaw, a real iconic species here. And then we eventually asked what are solutions? And some of the biggest issues that came up were manpower. In these official interviews, right, many would talk about sometimes not even having a Jeep to work. And you can't really go out enforcing hunting regulations if you can't drive there. And that has improved some over the recent years, but with 19 game wardens, it's just still not enough. And they're all very, very, I think, honest about it. It's a real challenge for them. But I've met some terrific game wardens, and they really want improvement, and they do seem to quite care about the wildlife. So what we will be doing with them, I think, is to be seen, but we welcome any sort of collaboration in a way that we can be supportive. That's where we are. So thank you, anonymous attendee. Let's see, do we have anything else here? Kishan, okay, let's see. Okay, wildlife farming and breeding, and you're interested in collaborating. That is an interesting one. So there are species that are disappearing from the wild. I'll let Neve and Lauren jump in. Let me say this very short and sweet, and let Neve and Lauren jump in, because I'm a social scientist. But there is a lot of room for propagation of local biodiversity. There are some groups that do this in very small volumes. We have not formally engaged on this. It is a missing piece for solving the long-term problem. But right now, Kishan, it sounds like you probably know a thing. The laws are unclear about how you could really do that until you get regulatory reform. So we're not pushing hard on something that is going to be technically under current regulations illegal. That said, there are many wildlife farmers. There is a great program at UE looking at breeding different animals. It's very doable, but it's one of these that you need to have some regulatory shift before I think NGOs can be responsible and start talking about it. So Keyshawn, if you want to talk, I would love that. And let me see, Neve, Lauren, anything to add?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky topic. I can talk to Tobago, but we can say for certain there are species that are locally being threatened by over hunting and habitat loss, as well as the resource depletion. Mostly overhunting would be our issue. Not all of our hunted game species are kept as pets. So right now, looking at the pet wildlife trade, we do end up excluding some game species. But this is space that we want to grow and learn more about, and how we can impact those issues. On the space, the ability to maybe let's talk about how we can maybe do reintroductions. So yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, but it's definitely something that's a little tricky right now with what Marcus explained. So yeah.
That's great. I'm just going through also of our chats here, and looks like we have a couple new questions if you guys want to look at that. I see some questions have been put in the chat. Thank you, Wendell. Let's see. Oh, how many, Ty Fernandez, you asked, how do the game wardens break down? If I recall this correctly, there are 5 currently in Tobago and 14 currently in Trinidad. Pre-COVID, there was a plan to hire a bunch more, but that's been put on hold. A bunch more meaning another 20. It's still probably not actually enough, but it is something a bit more. All right. Are many young born in private captivity? No, very few wildlife, Pat McGaw. I think you're asking how many pet wild animals or undomesticated animals are sourced from captive breeding. Some of these species are kept in droves in more, let's say, 4-season sort of countries, climates. In the U.S., you can get a macaw, and there's a stricter ringing system where you can keep track of what animal and how it's sourced. Something called closed band you put on when the bird is very young that you can't really manipulate later. You could set up a system like that and promote a little more captive breeding. For us right now, it's keep them in the wild and take better care of the ones we got. So we're not pushing much on captive breeding, but it is something that can be done. There is, to my knowledge, only 1 or maybe 2 captive breeders. And if you're ever interested in learning more, please contact me. That would be in the case of macaws. Some very little captive breeding right now for bullfinches. It's probably a realistic way forward because the hobby's so big. This is another one where you probably have between 20 and 40,000 bullfinches in captivity. And most of the bullfinch hobbyists will say that as many as 50 to 80% of these birds die before reaching adulthood. So it's tremendously wasteful from the wild sourcing. You could have captive breeding like they do in other countries in Brazil, but there's just no real capacity for anything at scale. Any captive bred bullfinch or macaw is a lot more expensive than one that you'd buy on the black market. So it's a viable solution in the real long term, but right now we think the biggest impact is just getting people to not buy these animals. And I'll just make one last point. One thing in our research is when people talk about the harms, most will say, oh, well, I've learned some things. in our interviews, and they do regret realizing how their monkey was obtained. Some do not even know that the mother was killed, or many don't have any idea of how many die along the trade chain. So every one bird you own, that's 3 or 4 that never made it. And those are the sort of messages we want to say is, you can love birds, but you don't have to participate in something this harmful. There's better ways to do it. Any questions for you, Neve and Lauren?
Let's see. We're getting a lot of great presentation, exclamation points in the chat, which is great. Thank you all. We hope you enjoyed it and it was informative. I think we've covered most of the general, the broad general topics that the questions have brought up. If there are any more questions that you'd like to ask, if your question wasn't really answered so much in us answering the questions we have, just drop it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. Yeah.
Oh, and if on the off chance we miss something, then feel free to message us. You can always message us and we can keep answering questions there.
Let me do a quick run, because we did say we said this until 6:45. Let's see, I'm seeing very at the bottom, Peter, comment on wildlife breeding augment declining wildlife populations. It's very resource intense. Answer the problem. There are too few animals. Design is going, why are there so few animals? Right, we got to keep them in the wild, and that's the big thing. So I think it's better to, it's more efficient to stop. This is not a great analogy. I don't want to depersonalize the animals and the lived experience they have. But if you think of wildlife populations as a bucket, a reservoir, we've got a really leaky bucket. Many things are leaving, and it's a lot easier to stop the leaks than to try and find something to put back in. It's very resource intense to propagate and put back animals. So, Peter, right there, I think you're getting at it. Yeah, we gotta keep the wild animals in the wild. Let's see, how many veterinarians specialized in paracare are there in Trinidad and Tobago? I hope to have a good answer for you on that in the next, let's say, 2 to 6 months. We have several that we know of, and we've learned a few more along the way in our research, but there are not that many that would feel comfortable with it. But the ones that are around are pretty terrific. Unfortunately, you only, to my knowledge, have any veterinarians like that in Trinidad. There are not any avian specialist vets in Tobago.
We have Natasha says, just a general comment. A friend of mine once randomly asked me where she could buy a monkey. I was horrified, of course, and I had no idea that could happen, but it seems monkeys aren't difficult to purchase. Her question piqued my interest in wildlife as pets and how unprepared people are to own them. I know this was addressed earlier, but the motivation for some people is just an opportunity to interact with another species. My friend is a dog owner now, by the way. She also has hamsters. Yes. I mean, monkeys are very charismatic. If you are unaware of the harms that are abound in the trade, you could kind of understand why someone who wants to be nurturing or thinks this is a animal that needs love and attention, you can understand why some people might want to own a monkey. But this is also with the caveat that they perhaps don't know about the harms. And so this is where we would like to step in and let people know about the issues around why you shouldn't have a monkey. There are numerous issues of why you shouldn't have a monkey, and I can't go into all of them. But yes, we would like to have people like your friend who didn't know about the harms be aware of it and do as she has done and get a dog or a hamster, which are domesticated animals rather than a wild animal.
And we also want to encourage people to go to places where they can see these animals in the wild. Like in Chaguaramas, if you want to see monkeys, my dad sees them playing golf on the golf course. They're around. You don't have to buy this pet and have all the attendant responsibility and moral conundrum. You can just go see them in the wild.
Responsibly, of course. We do ask that if people are going to go out exploring our nation, that they probably reach out to a accredited tour guide from the Tour Guide Association, just so that we don't have people tramping through bush trying to find some wildlife and causing harm.
Safety is important.
And of course, safety is an issue.
Trinidad, still Trinidad.
Yes. But yes, the monkeys in Chaguaramas, you can see the howlers as well as the capuchins, and it would be nice for us to be able to highlight the fact that most of those capuchins are not our native species. If you are going out to go look at them, they're probably releases or escapees of the trade. So that's always an interesting way to have people conceptualize that interaction as well.
And we have a question, will you include non-charismatic species such as overharvested guppies? And just a quick answer to that, yes, we will be looking into fish and amphibians, which we have not covered so far in our research, but that's definitely for our next steps.
Yeah, Farley, you're asking, as globally goes, when people look at wildlife trades, fish, especially freshwater fish, are really ignored. And same for amphibians. We didn't start with that just because it's complicated and they're not as high profile. Mammals, birds, reptiles are things that we found are much easier to talk to people about. But we do have this as a wish list item, let's say, to expand as well to these sorts of species and raise awareness. Maybe Amy Deacon will add a comment here, but there are a lot of exploited freshwater fish in this country that don't have a lot of population assessment, and we really don't know what the harms are. And some people do say it's hard to find in certain species. So we hope to change that.
Interestingly, there's also a trade of corals. Corals are traded locally. They're imported and kept for the aquarium trade. So this is also quite interesting, as I have a marine biology background. That is something I would like to look into in the future, as well as the fish. I like fish as well. The corals, yeah.
Great. We are at time. We're a little over, folks. I think what I'll suggest is, please, we try to be a very open, friendly, communicative group here. If you have questions, you can send us a message on our Facebook, on any of our social media accounts, although I'll admit Twitter is not yet our best social media forte. But you can definitely catch us on Facebook and Instagram very easily. And we're very happy to answer questions. And again, if you guys feel like there are some interesting activities to develop, please contact us. And if anything was unclear, please contact us. We'd love to clear that up.
Also via email. We respond to email and DMs and messages, not tweets so much, but yeah.
And if people really want to email, there it is, nurturenaturett@gmail.com.
Mark, would you just drop the website link, the website address as well one time?
And for folks who want our website, there you go, nurturenaturett.org.
It is live.
Yes. With that, thank you very much, everyone who has attended. I think these are pretty fantastic numbers for the start of a campaign. So we very much appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to us and learn a little bit. And we're here to collaborate and try and do some great work. So if you guys want to help us, we will be very happy to take that collaboration. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yes. Great. And this should be available as recording soon, and we will post this to YouTube as well, I will add. So thank you, everyone. Take care.